Right, Dave, we're going to be talking about something that's got a lot of question marks right now and a lot of confusion, I think,
Hmm.
in the industry, specifically in the defense sector, around DCC, the new cybersecurity model, DEF
Yep.
stands, what it all means, how they stitch together. So today, it would be good to spend a little bit of time to talk about what it is they are, how they work, and specifically try and illuminate some of the ways these things work, and most importantly, what they mean for our potential clients.
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So, why don't we just start right at the top? What is version 4 of the MOD's cybersecurity model?
Sure. Well, maybe even let's go one step further than that. So structurally, the MOD set out UK MOD. We're talking about specifically here, and we can talk about other nations a bit as well, and,
Yep.
and how it comes together. But fundamentally, the UK MOD wants to set a cybersecurity expectation for the supply chain.
Yeah.
So that's everything from ships to aeroplanes to ammunition to commodities like I don't know, catering supplies or anything, literally anything. The MOD is going to go and buy stuff from the private sector,
Yeah.
and has judged that the baseline government standards aren't enough for this sector, and therefore sets out its own cybersecurity standards. Now, there are a number of kind of intersecting sets of cybersecurity standards, but what we're talking about here specifically, and again we can talk about the others later, is the cybersecurity model, which is effectively around an organizational or operational cybersecurity standard, as distinct from secure by design, which is about a thing.
Yeah.
So if you imagine, the cybersecurity model is about the business, the company, the supplier. Secure by design is about the thing they're producing.
Got it.
That's not what we're talking about here. We can talk about that a bit as well, but this is about the cybersecurity model. So historically, and this has existed for a long time.
What, CSM?
Yeah, in various iterations. Historically, it was about protecting something called defense identifiable information. You can hear the capitalization.
Yeah,
The
DII.
MOD loves a 3-letter acronym.
Yeah.
And that was really about making sure that sensitive information did not end up either in the public domain, plastered all over a newspaper, which is embarrassing, or in the hands of foreign intelligence.
Yeah.
That was where the standard, and so its previous iteration, was really focused. And that set out a series of controls. And the process was supplier would be told what level they needed to achieve. They would complete a questionnaire, which basically said, yes, we've got this, no, we don't have that. And a judgment could be made then about the risk profile. Fundamentally, that concept's not changed in terms of the process. What has changed and you mentioned version 4, which came out in December last year, or went live in December last year.
Okay.
So that's the latest iteration. The change in this latest model is it still applies to the organization. It still applies to the operational cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But now it's gone from purely protecting information to also adding a layer about operational resilience. So are you as an organization in the supply chain able to continue operating in the face of cyber threats, cyber attacks? The CSM encompasses things like policy and process, but it also includes technical things. It includes your approach to risk management, includes governance, not just as a policy. Do you have a policy for X? But specific questions around do you have a board member responsible for this, or do you have cybersecurity considered in these kinds of ways? So it's a much broader waterfront.
Okay. So if that's CSM, then what's the Defense Cyber Certification? What's DCC?
So the Defence Cyber Certification is another new scheme launched broadly at the same time
As CSM?
As CSM version 4.
Four.
Yeah.
Okay.
So came up kind of back end of last year, and the Defence Cyber Certification is effectively a certification wrap around the cybersecurity model. So I mentioned earlier on this idea of completing a questionnaire. That is one way that companies can prove compliance, and we'll talk a bit more about compliance with what maybe in a minute.
Yeah.
That's definitely something to explore. But the DCC has been created to give organizations a different route to prove compliance. So rather than proving every time you go for a specific contract that you're compliant to a given risk level, and again, we're throwing around a lot of terms here,
Yeah.
so hopefully we'll unpack those over the course of this.
Yeah.
But the DCC allows you to take a certification approach. So approach a certifying body. They have an auditor, they have a process to follow, and at the end of that process, if you are successful, you get awarded a certification, a badge you can put on your website. In fact, we've got it. Yeah. We've got DCC level 0, which is the foundational level, which was all that was available at the time we initially applied. And you get a badge you can put on your website, and you are effectively then treated as compliant for a period of 3 years, with 2 caveats. One caveat is that the whole of the DCC scheme, the whole of the cybersecurity model for that matter, has Cyber Essentials as its foundation. So either Cyber Essentials or Plus, depending on the level.
Cyber Essentials.
Correct, yeah, the national scheme. And you have to retain Cyber Essentials, which is an annual certification.
Yeah.
So you have to commit to doing that, otherwise your DCC is invalid.
Okay. So it's valid for 3 years, but if your Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus lapses, you not only lose Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, you lose your DCC certification.
Correct. And then the other thing, there's a kind of attestation part to it where you say you attest to maintain the standards for the period. So at level 0, there are 3 controls that make up the DCC, the cybersecurity model at that level.
Yeah.
Basically, Cyber Essentials, a GDPR policy, and effectively a sort of resilience plan. If you go up to level 3, at the other end of the spectrum, Cyber Essentials Plus, and then 140 other controls.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent segue to the next question, which is, you were mentioning levels here.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could get into a little bit of detail about what these levels are, specifically what they mean for businesses, because I think that's what the question is going to be, is a lot of people are going to be looking at this and saying, what do I need as a defense supplier? What do I need to be successful in business?
Sure. So there's a critical document here, another one that's got a snappy title, which is the Defence Standard 05-138. You can tell I've spent a lot of time looking at this recently. That is effectively the sort of the meat of the cybersecurity model and the defence cyber certification, and it is exactly it says, a defence standard. There are defence standards for everything from logistics to ammunition to facilities management, whatever. Pick a thing. There's probably a defence standard for it.
Yeah.
And anyone who lives in the defence supply chain lives and breathes these documents. In this case, the defence standard sets out a series of controls. These are the measures that need to be implemented to be compliant, and it defines 4 levels. Level 0, 1, 2, and 3, with 0 being the most foundational, so applied to the lowest risk activities, projects, capabilities, level 3 being the highest. As you go up those increasing levels, the expectations increase, the level of complexity increases, and that is because those levels are driven by the risk profile. So let's take an example. If Defence is contracting for I don't know, let's say Defence needs a contract for some kind of commodity item, stationery. Defence needs to buy stationery. I would argue that the supply chain for pencils is pretty low risk. So taking into consideration, it's a commodity item. So lots of suppliers can supply you pencils. It's not necessarily operationally critical. Although, some of the headquarters I've seen would stop very quickly if they ran into supply of pencils.
Fair enough.
It's not particularly subject to interest from foreign intelligence services. So that's the kind of thing that will be awarded a very low level of cyber risk. And in the invitation to tender or in the RFP document, that will be specified. CRP level 0.
Got it.
And that means basically an organisation wanting to engage with that contract, with that opportunity, would need Cyber Essentials. They need a GDPR a policy. And they would need this resilience plan. And effectively, they would either self-attest through a supplier assurance questionnaire at the point of bidding, or they would go to one of the certifying bodies, get themselves a DCC level 0, which, depending on the size of the organisation, costs a few £100 for the certification, and then they're kind of good to go. So that's the level 0. So if we flip to the other end, the kind of the more extreme end. So we're really going to be talking here about things that are absolutely operationally critical in the supply chain, that are going to attract the attention of foreign intelligence service, that maybe are only a small handful, or maybe even a single supplier is able to provide, and therefore the resilience of the supply chain becomes really important. Yeah. Coming back to that point about operational resilience being a critical factor in this new scheme, they're going to be at the higher levels. And at that point, you are talking about Cyber Essentials Plus as table stakes. That's absolutely given at that level. And then 140 additional controls. What do I mean by controls? Well, it's everything. So the controls can range from risk management policy, physical security, who can access keys to get into server rooms, right through to really technical things like monitoring of security logs, like role-based access controls, control of software, encryption, data at rest, data in transit, all of the things that make up a really comprehensive cybersecurity model. And the specific languages in level 3 is around defense in depth. And the supplier assurance questionnaire at that level runs to hundreds of questions. You're being asked all kinds of really technical questions. And I guess one thing that is interesting about this scheme is, and you mentioned, what does it mean for companies? I think it means different things for different companies. So if you're a very small company, you might look at that list of controls and go, how on earth am I going to implement all of those things? But equally, if you're an enterprise, BAE Systems, one of the primes, even at that level, there are going to be things in there which aren't currently in place, controls which aren't currently in place. And implementing those things at enterprise level across a company of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands
hard stuff.
Is going to be tricky. Which is where the scoping then becomes really important.
Well, let's talk about scoping, right? Because I think it's a really important way of understanding where to use an overused phrase, the arcs of fire are in this, right? So what are the different ways that scoping is approached by the MOD on this?
So just maybe clarify what we mean by scoping. So when we talk about scope, we are effectively talking about what is the part of your operation, both operationally and technically, that is in the bounds of this scheme. Now, this is where this gets a little bit interesting, and where this is very much a live developing field. So when the cybersecurity model version 4 was first issued, the narrative, the documentation said that whole organizations are now immediately in scope. And you kind of see why. So if the theory is this is about operational resilience, you start to think about, okay, what threat vectors or what kinds of attack or impact could disrupt the supply chain? So could disrupting the HR department of a critical supplier have an impact on the supply chain? I would argue it could.
Yeah, of course it could.
I think there was a recognition, however, that was probably a bit too much of a simplistic view. So there is and it's a sort of amendment that's recently been issued. I'm going to say recently, I mean in the last 3 weeks. So this is brand new stuff. And some people might not have seen this because it wasn't necessarily actively pushed out, I think, particularly well, but it's there on the MOD website. And what that effectively does is it says it's about business critical. It's about operationally critical. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room in that. And again, not seen the case law. We've not seen this all work through. So I think we need to see that play through a little bit. But there's a diagram that explains that. And hopefully with the wizardry of the platform we're using, that diagram is now displayed for a few seconds while I talk over it, which basically shows that you can take an intersecting segment of your business, of your digital estate, and put that in scope.
So let's assume for a second that I'm a supplier of the MOD, supplier of some kind of commodity or service or something for the MOD, and I want to start bidding for tenders that are coming out for RFPs and ITTs and these types of things. How do I how do I approach this? What do I do?
So two approaches, I would say. One approach is the traditional process, and the other is the DCC kind of route. So start with the traditional process. So the first thing to do in any case is to understand what is the assigned cyber risk profile of that activity.
And where is that going to be listed?
So it's in the ITT.
It'll be in the ITT.
It should be in the ITT. Now, I've done a bit of searching on Find a Tender. I just have a look. And not every ITT has specified it yet. But let's assume that it's all fine and that it's there in the ITT, and that will specify two things in the ITT, or should do. There is the cyber risk profile level, 0 to 3, and a risk assessment reference, RAR, another 3-letter acronym. And that number effectively allows you to then access the system, the cybersecurity model system.
Got it. Okay. I see. So I'm a business. I'll see that it's let's assume for a second it says that it's DCC level 2
or CRP level 2.
CRP level 2. Right.
Remind me to come back though on DCC being mandated, because that is an important point.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
We do need to come back to that.
But let's say it says it's CRP level 2.
Yeah.
I'm a business. I don't have anything yet.
Yeah.
What do I do?
So I guess there's a couple of things you can do. So a lot of this depends on what capabilities you've got in-house. So let's take a model where you've got a cybersecurity team in-house.
Yep.
Maybe you're a dual use, or maybe you've done work in another nation, defense supply chain.
Yep.
You've got a cybersecurity team. You kind of understand the principles of what this is all about.
Yep.
So in that case, you'll be going to the cybersecurity model documentation online, to the DefStan, looking at level 2, and effectively auditing yourself, I would say, as a first step against those controls. Going through one by one, is that in place? Yes, no, yes, no. When you're sufficiently confident in that, you would then engage with the portal, which again is all linked on the MOD site.
Yep.
Put in that risk assessment reference,
Yep.
and that allows you to then complete a supplier assurance questionnaire, SAQ.
Okay.
So that's then effectively the self-assessment against that process.
Would a company need to do that if they had DCC certification level 2?
No, so that's the other route. Now there's a little bit of connective tissue that isn't currently there. So what you can't do at the moment is, in an automagical way, access the portal and just give it your DCC reference.
Okay.
That I've been told is coming.
Cool.
But I don't know when.
Yeah.
But there was another recent bulletin issued again in the last couple of weeks, which said that DCC is now going to be accepted as evidence. So just taking one step back from that specific point is, when you are submitting your ITT or your response to that ITT into a delivery team, you are effectively going to need to give them evidence of compliance. And that will be either an output from the SAQ portal, the Supplier Assurance Questionnaire, or your DCC reference. So you show them at level 2.
Now, so those are the only 2 routes that you've got to demonstrate that you're meeting CRP level 2.
On the assumption that you're meeting it at that point.
Right.
So what I hear you ask, do you do if you're not quite there yet?
What do you do if you're falling short?
So if you're falling short, there is a process for that too. Of course there is. It's the MOD. They love a process. I spent 18 years in the organisation.
Who doesn't love a process?
Exactly. And the process for that is you need a cyber improvement plan.
Yeah.
So that cyber improvement
CIP.
Another 3-letter. You can hear the capitalisation when I say it. The whole point of that cyber improvement plan is to say, I know I need to be here. I am currently here. Here is my plan. And I think historically, that has been a concern that this would, be signed off, non-compliant bid, but here's a plan, a notional cyber improvement plan. And there'd be no follow-up on this. So one of the other aspects of this new model is an expectation of greater checking of homework, I think.
Yeah.
So even though the supplier assurance questionnaire is a self-attestation, there is an expectation there will be more scrutiny, more audits, more checking. And that's not just of the primes, that's also of subcontractors, because this stuff flows down through the supply chain. So just to sort of round that bit off, so you produce your cyber improvement plan, which says we're here, we need to get to here, we're going to get there by this one. So just give you a live example of somebody we worked with recently. There were a couple of elements on there where it just needed, they needed to get the response in. They didn't want to miss a contractual deadline to get a response in, but there were a couple of controls that hadn't been fully implemented yet. We knew what that looked like. We knew how we needed to implement them. So we're supporting the business in doing that. And we stated by contract start, which was, I think, only 2 weeks in. It was quite a fast burn thing, sort of an innovation project, that those would be in place. And it would then be reasonable of the delivery team to come back and say, show me the evidence then that these things are now in place.
Show me the money.
Yeah. So that's the process. The other nuance in terms of compliance, or 100% compliance versus not 100% compliance, is, and this is contentious. I think this is contentious. I absolutely understand the thinking here, but again, we need to see how this plays out in real life.
Yeah.
Right. So the supplier assurance questionnaire is a binary thing. You're engaging with a computer.
Yeah.
Question: do you have this in place? Yeah. Tick yes, no.
Yeah.
And the boxes are literally, yes, no, or variations of 60 days, 90 days, whatever.
Yeah.
But then they're not free text.
Yeah. Got it.
The only way you can have a conversation with that system, as it were, is through a cyber improvement plan.
Yeah.
Or you just have a conversation with the delivery team. Okay. That's also a valid thing. And effectively, you say we are going to be non-compliant on this, and they go, yeah, fine, we understand why.
At bid time.
Yes.
Okay.
With the DCC, because you're talking to a human, the auditor has the leeway.
Yeah.
So the auditor can say,
yes, by the letter of the law.
This is non-compliant, but I see you are achieving the security value. Therefore, I'm going to take this control as compliant, even though you've achieved it in a different way.
Yeah,
that's a really important nuance, and I think for me that's one of the strengths of DCC, and I think that's where we will see people wanting to go down that route.
Yeah,
because it allows you to take a more nuanced approach to everything from scoping to the technical controls.
We talk an awful lot about the MOD in this context, but the MOD very rarely operates in isolation, and obviously with our European partners, with NATO partners, with our transatlantic partners, there's an awful lot of interoperability that goes on. Is any of this interoperable with our partners? Could I get DCC level 2 in the UK, and that would apply to a bid that I'm writing for the German market?
Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be lovely, Steve?
Or Canada, or the US, or
Japan, or South Korea. So that is the intent. 100%. That is the intent. So the two things I'd say about that is, in a kind of top-down way, there is absolutely an intent to do that, and there are, as far as I'm aware, not being in government anymore, there are talks going on with different nations to agree that reciprocity and effectively allow that scheme to apply in different places. One would reasonably expect that NATO, for example, across NATO nations, one certificate would be good. Not at the moment, though.
Does NATO have its own?
It actually doesn't. So NATO has a bunch of standards, but they're more around technical interoperability and security.
Like Link 16 and stuff
like
that.
But also things like the standards to protect NATO secret, for example. But the implementation of those is handled at national level. One thing we've not talked about is where these controls have come from. So these, 140 of us level 3 or whatever. Who's dreamt these up? And the answer is the MOD has not just dreamt these up. They are based on international best practice, which comes from NIST, so the US NIST system, who set standards for all kinds of things. And in this case, it's the NIST 800-171, which is the US Department of Defense, or Department of War, as we must now call it, specification around cybersecurity.
So for clarification, that's the National Institute for Standards and Technology.
I wasn't going to try and remember it, but you did, so that's fine. So NIST 800-171 is the control set. And that is the control set that has been used to develop the DEFSTAN 05138.
Yeah.
So the fundamental underlying controls are, in large part, the same.
Yeah. Well, I would argue, sorry to interrupt, but I would argue that when it comes to cyber controls, there's only so many ways that you can talk about it. You can curate them differently, you can catalog them differently, but ultimately the controls are all going to they're all going to be the same, no matter how you choose to categorize.
So they are, but this is more than a philosophical alignment. That there is a direct read across. The controls map. Pretty much that. The numbers are broadly the same. Okay. There's 110 controls in this 800-171, which kind of maps to level 2 CRP. So the underlying bit's the same. There's sort of a top-down thing which says, in the future we'll have reciprocity. But the reality is, in the middle of all of that, which is where businesses are operating, they are different schemes. The way of proving them is different. The evidence required is different. The audit regime is different.
Let's say I'm a defense supplier. I am building, counter drone capabilities in the UK. We're a small team based in the Midlands, just this is all hypothetical, and we have 25 staff, decent turnover, but we're not loaded. We're not making huge amounts of revenue. This all sounds pretty expensive if I'm an SME trying to help the UK become more resilient to the threats that we're facing these days.
So it can be. One of the things we've been talking about quite a bit recently is, exactly that question, is how do we help people through that? So if we take the example of the defence tech startup we're working with at the moment, which started off as one person, came to us right at the start. On day one, that company, that person, doesn't need to have all the compliance in place. He needs a secure environment to build his business. They've now scaled to 3. Then I've started to look at some MOD contracts. We're starting that conversation now about the next level of compliance. But I think the key thing here is about, and the whole point of us having this conversation, right, is to help people understand the scheme. Because you don't need to hit all the marks from day one. What you need to do is understand where you're going to likely be and when. So for that example, let's say they've got some seed money. I would be advising that company to get the foundations in place. Get Cyber Essentials, start to look at the DefStan, start to look at the foundational controls that are, maybe at level 1, and start to think about what it looks like to implement those. What if that company you described has maybe got one person, I don't know, let's say the chief operating officer who notionally has cybersecurity under their thing, but they're not, they're not a cybersecurity expert. That's where we're trying to build a set of services that can help people through that. And as we'll discuss in other videos, and we'll unpack this in a bit more detail, our kind of cybersecurity as a service model, or get in the trenches and do the work model, I think really applies here. Because what that company could do by engaging someone like us, and there are different ways of going about this, but by engaging someone like us, is to effectively, get the experts in to help with that problem.
And essentially, what you're looking for is not necessarily someone to point at the things that you're doing wrong. It's someone to point out the things that the gaps where we're not currently achieving what we need to, and then jump in the trenches, roll up the sleeves, and get stuck into solving those problems.
We've talked a lot about compliance today. Compliance doesn't give you security in and of itself. You know that. Like, we've talked about this a million times. The way that these schemes, for me, add value is by formalizing and codifying stuff that you should be doing anyway. And having the right security to protect yourself against the threats. It should be an easy leap to go to compliance. Now, we know that's not always true. The frameworks don't always align. We talked about an example earlier on about split tunneling, for example. But I think what MOD has done well with this scheme is to say, okay, it's a bigger picture. It's about being able to continue to operate in the face of in the face of the threats that are faced by the sector.
So then coming back to it, and we'll wrap up here. But coming back to it, what are the ways? If I was a supplier, again being asked to meet a certain CRP standard, then what are the things that I should be asking of suppliers? What are the things that I could be out there grabbing that are going to help me here? What are the different ways that they manifest themselves? Are they projects? Are they like, do I need to hire a CISO? Do I need to talk to my IT? Like, what does that look like?
We see this with our clients. There are so many different models out there: internal security teams, IT teams, external providers, whatever. So I think a lot of it is kind of start where you are. But one of the things we developed to help out with this is our kind of CSM snapshot tool. This is a free tool, and again, link in the whatever it is.
We'll put a link in the description, in the show notes. Click on like and subscribe.
I can't believe you said that. Maybe there's a screenshot of the tool that's up there right now. But we developed the tool to help people get an initial view of where they are. So it works for level 1, 2, and 3. So you can select the level. There's a version for kind of business leaders, which is not very technical. There's a version if you've got an internal kind of technical person, maybe looks after your IT, or you could ask your MSP to kind of fill it out, which takes about 10 minutes. The business version is 8 questions, takes like 5 minutes, and it will give you an instant snapshot It will give you a bit of a radar diagram, and it will give you the kind of top level. No, it is not an assessment, right? It is not a full-on, gap analysis.
Checker.
It's a checker. It's a starting point. It will
Yep.
give you a sense of where you are, and then from there, I think the conversation that we would be having is, okay, well, what do you want to achieve by when? What's that roadmap look like? And then it's effectively a series of implementation of controls, people, process, technology, that will get you to where you need to be. Now, our approach to that is to sort of view that as all part of one thing, right? So
We call it Midas.
yeah, exactly. So our Midas service is designed specifically to sort of take an as a service approach to that, which is to start to implement the security and then just, tighten the levels of security as we go, calibrate them against the business,
Run it as a change program.
keep improving the security all the time.
Yeah.
And then specifically this sector, it's about doing that in the context of that compliance plan, right? So it's about recognizing that there's a tension between the threats and the compliance requirements, but that you can navigate that by doing some really good foundational things early and then layering the additional requirements on them as you go. So understanding that requirement, and that's something we are helping people with, helping people understand that roadmap, build that compliance plan, build that cyber implementation plan, write a cyber improvement plan if needs be, because the timings of contracts might be they need to get that in, and then kind of work on from there.
Cool. All right. Well, I think this has been super illuminating. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully, people find this very, very valuable. I know that there are a lot of questions about DCC and CRPs and CMMCs and DEF stands and all that kind of stuff.
So many acronyms.
It's good to have somebody who's been in the trenches of this actually kind of shine a light into it to talk about what the differences are, how they all integrate together, and importantly what it means for the MOD supply base.
Yeah.
So thanks
Well,
for your
hopefully
time.
it's helpful, and hopefully people find this useful. Get in touch, and we can do some more.
Thanks very much.